Hi, and welcome to or back to my channel. May was a great reading month, partly because I challenged myself to finally tackle a stack of books that had just been collecting dust on my shelves. And I'm happy to report I read all but one of them. I'll talk more about that one a little later, but for now, I'll be sharing some thoughts, some enthusiastic, some conflicted, on everything I finished in the month of May, from my least to most favorite. Let's start with The Perfect Divorce by Geneva Rose. This one follows Sarah, a high-powered attorney whose ex-husband was once accused of murder. Now she's remarried, but when her current husband cheats and that mistress goes missing, she finds herself back in the spotlight of a very messy investigation. So this is a follow-up to The Perfect Marriage, which I remember flying through and enjoying for its messy drama and sharp pacing. The Perfect Divorce, however, felt like the spark was gone. We bounce between multiple characters and perspectives, but instead of building tension, it just left me feeling disconnected. The characters were flat enough that now, a few weeks later, I can honestly say that I don't remember much about them. I kept hoping that the plot would pick up or surprise me, but it stayed pretty predictable. I found myself wishing it would just wrap up, and that's never a good sign. I ended up giving it 2.5 stars. Okay, so moving along to Summer in the City by Alex Astor. This one's a summer in New York City romance about Elle, a screenwriter on a deadline who's hoping the city will shake her writer's block. But her new apartment has a very unexpected neighbor, a tech billionaire who also happens to be the guy she had a one-night stairwell hookup with 2 years ago. Now they're enemies for some reason, sharing a wall, and maybe a little more than that. This book actually started off really strong for me. I liked Elle's voice, and Parker had that intriguing balance of charm and mystery. I was into the setup of them exploring the city together to help her get her creative spark back. It was predictable, yes, but in that cozy rom-com kind of way that I didn't mind. But the deeper we got, the more I started to part ways with Elle. I get that she's working through stuff from her past, but I started to feel like the way she treated Parker wasn't okay. He kept compromising, kept showing up for her, and I couldn't help thinking, what's he really getting in return? For me, it crossed a line from emotional conflict into something that bordered on emotionally manipulative. It left me with that kind of unsettled feeling that made it hard to root for the romance by the end, and I gave it 2.5 stars. And then from glossy billionaire romance to something a lot quieter and more introspective, A Quitter's Paradise by Alicia Chang. I'll be honest, what drew me to this book was the Sarah Jessica Parker connection. I absolutely adore her. So this novel follows Eleanor, a woman unraveling in the wake of her mother's death. She's dropped out of her PhD program, she's stopped responding to her husband, and has taken to wandering the streets of New York, scattering snacks in her wake. I won't give away why. It's clearly about grief, but the kind that comes from losing someone you never fully understood in the first place. Alongside Eleanor's story, we also get glimpses into her Taiwanese immigrant parents' past, mainly her mother Rita, and how it can be hard to raise kids in a place that feels so far from home. I appreciated the dual perspectives in this one. Rita's chapters brought a lot of depth to the story and made me think about how much of our family history we'll never fully know. I also thought the book did a really thoughtful job of showing how generational and cultural differences can make it hard to relate, even to your own blood. There's this underlying sadness in how Rita can't seem to understand her daughters because they're American in ways she never was. That said, I actually slightly preferred Eleanor's present-day storyline, even though her choices made me incredibly anxious. But I think that's the point. Her grief and confusion felt real. I just wish it had gone somewhere more complete. The emotion it stirred up in me felt a bit wasted once I realized the story wasn't really building toward anything. I ended up giving this one 3 stars. Next up is Ready or Not by Cara Bastone. This one follows Eve, a woman who's used to the familiar rhythms of life until one night. She has a one-night stand that throws her into the deep end of an unplanned pregnancy. As she navigates what this means for her future, it's not her best friend she finds the most comfort in, but her best friend's older brother, Shep, who's suddenly kind of perfect. Okay, I know this book is being called Book of the Year by some outlets, and I do get it to a degree. It's got humor, heart, and real topics like unplanned pregnancy and how fertility struggles can affect all of our relationships. But for me, something about it didn't quite click. I found the romance predictable, and even though Shep is obviously the right guy, it felt a little too neat. Like, he's always loved her, always been there for her, except when he was in an almost decade-long relationship. And suddenly, he's not the goofy guy she always knew, but swoon-worthy and magnetic overnight. Maybe I'm jaded, but that shift did not fully land for me. Honestly, I was more invested in the arc of the baby's father. He felt more complex before sort of being softened into this conveniently very flawed background character. It wasn't a bad read, it's just not one I'll be thinking about for long. I did give it 3 stars because it did keep me turning the pages with interest. From lighthearted fiction to something much heavier, let's talk about the first of my Read It or Unhaul It books, and that is Salvage the Bones by Jessamyn Ward. Set over 12 days in the lead up to Hurricane Katrina, this story follows Esh, a 14-year-old girl navigating an unexpected pregnancy, a mostly absent father, and life in rural poverty alongside her brothers. At its core, it's a portrait of a family that's fiercely bonded in the face of hardship, neglect, and impending disaster. That said, I went into this thinking it would center more on the storm and its impact, or even the emotional weight of Esh's pregnancy. But really what dominates the story is the subplot around dogfighting. It ended up taking over the narrative in ways I wasn't prepared for. And one chapter in particular was incredibly disturbing. There were important, uncomfortable themes here, and the writing is stunning, truly lyrical and evocative. But the mistreatment of dogs overshadowed everything here to the point where I found myself struggling to stay with the story. Because of the writing alone, I gave this 3 stars, but it's definitely not one I would recommend lightly. Shifting from the chaos of rural Mississippi to something more internal and existential, next up, let's talk about Weather by Jenny Offil. This one follows Lizzie, a librarian turned podcast assistant, who spends her days responding to anxious listeners of a doomsday show. Between her caregiving tendencies and obsession with collapse, both personal and planetary, it's a portrait of quiet unraveling. It's a really short book, and honestly, maybe too short. I closed it feeling like I hadn't gotten the full picture. Just this lingering sense of unease and dread. It reminded me a little bit of Delphi by Claire Pollard, minus the Greek references, in that it's more about mood than plot. Still, I could see what the author was doing thematically, and I appreciated the quiet panic woven through it. I wouldn't say it deeply moved me, but I didn't regret reading it either. I ended up giving it 3 stars. Okay, let's break things up a bit with something a bit more sweeping and mythological, and that is Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. This was another of my Read It or Unhaul It books for the month of May, and is a retelling of the Iliad through the eyes of Patroclus, who forms a deep bond and eventually a romance with Achilles, the golden boy of Greek mythology. As the Trojan War looms, so does the sense that their love is doomed by fate. I think what stood out to me the most here was the writing. I know that doesn't make me very original. Miller's prose is just gorgeous, lush but accessible, with moments that feel both timeless and intimate. That said, I think the hype worked against me with this one. I went in expecting something that would destroy me emotionally, and while I did enjoy it, I didn't connect with it quite as much as I had hoped. I found myself wanting more autonomy and development for Patroclus, And the pacing in the last third dragged for me. I was kind of ready for the heartbreak just so it could be over. But even with that said, I'd still call it a captivating read, and I'm really curious to see how Circe hits for me when I do get to that one. I gave The Song of Achilles 3.5 stars. The next one is also from my Read It or Unhaul It stack, and that is Sea of Tranquility by Emily St. John Mandel. This one jumps between centuries and characters, from an exiled young man in 1912 to a famous author on a futuristic book tour to a detective investigating a time anomaly in the far future. It weaves these seemingly disconnected threads together around a shared, almost haunting moment. So this book is also gorgeously written, there's no denying that, but I felt a little disconnected and emotionally removed the entire time. It took me a while to get oriented, and once I did, I wasn't super invested in the outcome. There's a pretty satisfying full circle moment at the end, which I guess is what bumped it up a little bit for me, but I still finished feeling like maybe I missed something important. After reading other reviews, I know I'm not the only one. It was also mentioned that this very closely resembles Cloud Atlas, which I haven't read yet, but I have read Ghostwritten by David Mitchell and loved it. So maybe I'll prioritize that just to see how they compare. Let me know if you've read either or both and what your thoughts are. In the end, I ended up giving that one 3.5 stars. Another one from my Read It or Unhaul It stack, The Iliad Crest by Christina Rivera Garza. This one opens on a dark and stormy night when two strange women show up at our unnamed narrator's home and start unraveling his sense of self. They insist they know his secret, that he's actually a woman. What unfolds from there is a surreal, gender-bending, psychological spiral that's part gothic mystery and part philosophical exploration. About halfway through, I had this intense moment of, wait, what is this reminding me of? Like deja vu. And then it hit me. I'm thinking of Ending Things by Emmalynn Reed. Maybe I'm alone here, but I never expected to link these two books. But something about the eerie unraveling of reality, the isolated settings, the blurring of identity, it definitely triggered the same unsettling feeling. The ideas here are brilliant. The atmosphere is haunting and perfectly suited to the gothic tone, but I didn't connect with it as deeply as I wanted to. I think I admired it more than I enjoyed it, and I left the book thinking more about other stories it reminded me of than about the one I just finished. I gave this one 3.5 stars. All right, shifting back to romance with Story of My Life by Lucy Score. This one honestly had me grinning like a crazy person for the first half. In it, we follow Hazel, a romance novelist who's deep in a post-breakup slump and way past her deadline. So naturally, she panic buys a fixer-upper in small-town Pennsylvania and crashes into town, literally, and into the orbit of a grumpy, good-hearted contractor named Cam. Hazel's got writer's block, Cam's got walls up, and soon she's not just writing a romance, she's actually living one. I know the grumpy sunshine dynamic is everywhere right now, but this one worked so well. The banter was sharp, Hazel's best friend was an actual joy to read, and I was totally sold on Cam and his family. Like Summer in the City, this also plays with the man as muse theme, but I think this book handled it better. There were genuine sparks here. I was kicking my feet under the covers at times. But once they got together, some of the shine wore off. The pacing dipped, the plot got a little formulaic, and the third act conflict was one of those where you just kind of groan and wait it out. Still, for what it was, this was super enjoyable. I gave it 3.75 stars, and I'll definitely be picking up book 2 when it comes out. All right, next up is Annihilation by Jeff Vandermeer, part of my Read It or Unhaul It challenge, and one I was really excited to finally pick up. It follows an all-female crew sent to a mysterious and dangerous zone called Area X. There have been 11 failed expeditions before them, Some ended in death, some in madness, and they're sent in basically blindfolded, told to record what they see, but not to trust their own minds or even each other. So yeah, somewhat unsettling right from the start. I was totally gripped in the beginning. The tension, the secrecy, the biological weirdness all pulled me in fast. But despite the strong setup, I didn't walk away from this one feeling like I needed to immediately dive into the next book in the series. It's super short, and while that helped it stay tightly focused, it also meant I didn't quite have room to build up the kind of momentum that I was hoping for. There's a lot of promise here, and I do plan to keep going with it, but it left me feeling like this should have been part one of a larger novel rather than a standalone volume. I did give this one 3.75 stars. And I am holding out hope that the next one fills in some of the blanks. Okay, next is Summer Romance by Annabelle Monaghan. This one read a bit quiet and under the radar for me. It follows Allie, a newly single mom and professional organizer whose life is ironically kind of a mess. She's dealing with grief, a divorce, and a tense relationship with her teenage daughter. So when a chance encounter leads to a sweet connection with someone new, it's unexpected, but also kind of healing. To be honest, it started off slow and I wasn't sure if it would land for me. But this one really did grow on me. I appreciated how grounded and realistic Allie's day-to-day struggles felt, and I ended up finding the romance surprisingly touching. The love interest initially gave off a bit of an ick, not his fault, and I don't want to give anything away, but Allie wasn't sure about him at first, and I was a bit horrified putting myself in the same position. That said, he ended up being the best part of the story. I especially loved how he dealt with the final conflict, calm, emotionally mature, and supportive without ever losing himself. I could have done without the cartoonishly bad ex. He felt a little too over the top and unnecessary, but overall, this one left me feeling warm and fuzzy. I gave it 3.75 stars. All right, second to last here is The Love Haters by Catherine Center. This one is just a perfect summer read. We've got Katie, a video producer whose job is on the chopping block, and suddenly she's whisked off to Key West to film a feature on a Coast Guard rescue swimmer. There's just one tiny issue. She can't swim, but she pretends she can. Oh, and the rescue swimmer, Hutch, is the estranged brother of her coworker. So, of course, we're already set up for drama. Honestly, the vibes here were immaculate. The setting, this sun-soaked lodge full of strong older women taking swim classes by day and sharing cocktails by night. It was everything. Such found family perfection. And Hutch's dog basically steals the show. And watching him win Katie over one paw at a time was adorable. Now, the reason this wasn't a 5-star, I don't want to spoil anything once again, but the conflict. That conflict, dare I say, it felt lazy, and it was definitely frustrating and pulled me right out of the story. Still, I flew through this one, and overall I had a great time. I gave it 4 stars. And sticking with Catherine Center, let's chat about the rom-commers. This one follows Emma, a devoted caretaker for her dad and a total rom-com nerd who gets the opportunity of a lifetime, a 6-week rewrite gig in LA with none other than her screenwriting idol, Charlie Yates. Except he's kind of the worst. He doesn't believe in love. His script is an actual dumpster fire, and he doesn't want her help. At first, I was a little thrown by how dialogue heavy the beginning was. I found myself wondering when I was going to start caring about Emma. But as her backstory slowly unfolded, it all made sense. She's carrying deep grief, and the pacing reflects how tightly she's holding herself together. Once she and Charlie really started working together, the creative spark between them was off the charts. I didn't mind the conflict here at all. It felt earned, and their growth through it was incredibly satisfying. Honestly, the relationship between Emma and her younger sister was also such a standout. I definitely teared up during some of those scenes toward the end. This was such a thoughtful blend of charm and depth. And while it didn't quite hit 5 stars for me, it came very close. I gave it 4.25. So that wraps up everything I read in May, almost. The last of my May Read It or Unhaul It books was To Sleep in a Sea of Stars by Christopher Paolini. It didn't quite make the cut in time, but I did start it. And I'll definitely be talking about it in my June wrap-up. And I do want to keep this momentum going and prioritize a few more books that have been hanging around my physical TBR. So I'll quickly share a few of those titles that I'm planning to fit in the month of June. First up is Silver Elite. This was my book of the month pick before the controversy over the author's identity. What drew me in was the high stakes setup. A powerful psychic on the run gets forced into an elite military training program and ends up entangled with her enemy turned love interest. It's giving YA dystopian nostalgia with a bit of Red Queen, and I'm curious to see how it plays out. Next is The Idiot by Elif Batuman. This one's been haunting my shelf and my conscience, because I made it about 80 pages in before soft DNFing it. Not because I wasn't interested, but because I got distracted and then way too much time passed. So I'll be starting it over. It follows Celine, a Turkish-American freshman at Harvard in the 90s, as she fumbles her way through classes, email flirtations, and an oddly meandering summer in Europe. It's literary and introspective, and I'm hoping to connect with it more than I did the last time. And the last physical book I'll be talking about is Untold Night and Day by Bae Sua. I've been making an effort to include at least one translated work in my reading each month, and this Korean novel sounds like it will hit that disorienting, surreal sweet spot. It follows a former audio theater worker over one night and one day in Seoul as reality starts to fray and the line between memory and present unravels. I'm also keeping an eye on a couple of library holds that should come in soon, one of them being Creep by Emma von Straten. I'm especially intrigued by this one. It follows Alice, who's developed a full-on obsession with a man whose apartment she cleans. It's told in her acidic, unreliable voice and sounds like it's going to be a dark, character-driven spiral about loneliness and fantasy versus reality. Definitely giving You meets My Year of Rest and Relaxation. And then there's The Emperor of Gladness by Ocean Vuong. I absolutely loved On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous, so this new release shot straight to the top of my list. It follows a young man on the brink of ending his life who ends up caring for an elderly widow instead. I'm expecting it to be heartbreaking, hopeful, and beautifully written. Exactly the kind of emotional depth I know Vuong can deliver. And yeah, that should leave me with a little room for mood reading this month. No doubt many books will catch my eye. If you've read any of these or have June reading plans of your own, please let me know in the comments. Thanks so much for watching and hanging out with me today, and I'll see you all again soon in the next video. Bye!